Paris, 1665. The city gleams under the reign of the Sun King, Louis XIV, whose brilliance outshines even the shadows drawing near. In the narrow streets of the Saint-Germain quarter, where the scent of fresh bread mingles with jasmine perfume escaping from aristocratic gardens, lives Marie, a 22-year-old woman whose beauty rivals the paintings adorning the halls of Versailles Palace. But Marie is not of noble birth. Her father, a respected clockmaker, built a modest yet dignified life and taught his daughter that a person's true worth lies not in titles, but in the integrity of their character. Marie met Pierre on a spring afternoon when he entered her father's workshop to repair a pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather. Pierre was different from the young men she knew. He didn't display the arrogance of nobles strolling the city's wide avenues, nor did he carry the hardness of merchants fighting daily for survival. There was a depth in his brown eyes that suggested someone who knew both joy and sorrow, who understood that life was woven with threads of light and shadow. He was a navigator, son of an Irish merchant family that had fled religious persecution in their homeland and found refuge in France. His family had settled in Paris 2 generations prior, building a modest import business of fabrics and spices. The love between Marie and Pierre blossomed like the rose bushes adorning the small courtyard of Marie's parents' home. It wasn't a tempestuous love, the kind that consumes and destroys. It was a love built on evening conversations, on glances that spoke louder than 1,000 words, on hands touching with the reverence of those holding something precious and fragile. Pierre told Marie about the seas he had sailed, about distant lands where the sun seemed larger and the stars shone with an intensity that defied imagination. Marie, in turn, shared her simple dreams with him: a family, a house filled with children's laughter, a life lived with purpose and love. In less than a year, Pierre asked for Marie's hand. The ceremony was modest, held in the small church of Saint-Sulpice, but for the 2 young people, that day shone brighter than any celebration at Versailles Palace. Married life brought a happiness that seemed almost unreal. Pierre worked with his father in the family business, and Marie helped her own mother, who was beginning to show the first signs of an illness doctors couldn't name. It was a progressive weakness, a persistent cough, a pallor that deepened each day. But in those first months of marriage, even worry about her mother couldn't obscure the light illuminating Marie's heart. Then came the summer of 1666, bringing alarming news. A smallpox epidemic had erupted in London, devastating entire neighborhoods. The disease, known as the White Plague, was merciless. It covered victims, bodies with painful pustules, left disfiguring scars on survivors, and killed 1 in every 3 infected persons. In Paris, authorities tried to control the entry of goods and travelers from England, but knew it was only a matter of time before smallpox crossed the English Channel and reached France. It was in this context of growing fear that Pierre received an urgent letter from his uncle Patrick, who had remained in Ireland managing part of the family business. The letter brought devastating news. Religious persecution had intensified, and the family risked losing everything, including their lands and possessions. Patrick begged Pierre to travel immediately to Ireland, not only to help resolve complex legal matters, but also to bring back his cousin Siobhan, a 16-year-old girl who had been orphaned and was now in danger. The journey would be long and dangerous, taking at least 3 months, perhaps more, depending on sea conditions and the political situation. Pierre was torn. His loyalty to the Irish family ran deep, but leaving meant abandoning Marie just as Paris began living under the epidemic's shadow. They talked through entire nights, sitting in the small garden of their house, beneath moonlight bathing everything in its silver glow. Marie held her husband's hands and said something that would define the course of their lives. "Pierre, you must go. Your family needs you, and your cousin Siobhan has no one else. I'll be fine. I'll care for my mother, and when you return, we'll be here waiting. Our love is strong enough to endure a few months' distance." Pierre departed one July morning when fog still covered the Seine River. Marie stood on the quay, watching the ship slowly pull away until it became merely a dot on the horizon. She touched the locket Pierre had given her before leaving. Inside it, a small portrait of him and a lock of his hair. He had promised to return before winter, promised that nothing, not storms nor distance, would prevent him from returning to her arms. The weeks that followed were marked by growing anxiety. Smallpox finally reached Paris in August, brought by merchants who had been in London. The first cases appeared in the poorest neighborhoods, where people lived crammed into houses without proper ventilation. But the disease respected no class boundaries. Within weeks, nobles and commoners, rich and poor, all fell before the fury of the White Plague. Marie did everything possible to protect her mother. She avoided leaving home unnecessarily, washed her hands frequently, burned aromatic herbs that, according to some, warded off the miasmas responsible for the disease. But her mother grew increasingly weak, and Marie knew she would need stronger medicines, medical care that could only be obtained from across the city, where an apothecary known for his effective mixtures lived. It was during one of these journeys, on a gray September afternoon, that Marie's fate changed forever. She had gone to fetch medicines and was hurrying home when she passed a narrow alley where an entire family lay sick. A child, no more than 5 years old, cried alone beside her mother's body. Marie couldn't pass by indifferently. She entered the fetid house, took the child in her arms, cleaned her tear-covered face, and carried her to a charity house run by nuns. She didn't know it, but that child was already infected. And by touching her, by holding her against her chest, Marie had sealed her own fate. The first symptoms appeared 3 days later. High fever, unbearable headaches, back and limb pain. Marie tried to hide it from her mother, but it was impossible. When pustules began appearing, first on her face, then on her arms and torso, the terrible truth became undeniable. Marie had contracted smallpox. The disease followed its cruel course. For 2 weeks, Marie oscillated between life and death. Her mother, despite her own weakness, cared for her with the dedication of someone who knows they may be living their last days with their daughter. Marie's old clockmaker father hired doctors, paid for bloodlettings that supposedly purified the blood, burned incenses and herbs, prayed with desperate faith. But all they could do was wait. Marie survived. But the price of her survival was high. When the fever finally broke and the pustules began to dry, she asked for a mirror. Her mother hesitated, but Marie insisted. What she saw reflected in that mirror destroyed something within her. Her face, which had once been compared to beauties painted by Renaissance masters, was covered in deep scars. The smallpox marks weren't discreet. They were brutal, disfiguring. Her nose was partially destroyed, her skin a map of craters and furrows. Marie wept. She wept not from vanity, but because she knew what those scars meant. Pierre would return, and when he saw her, what would he feel? Revulsion, pity. She couldn't bear the idea of seeing that pure love shining in his eyes transform into horror, or, worse still, forced compassion. She knew human nature well enough to know that however much we love someone, physical appearance matters, and she didn't want to be loved out of pity. Then came the news that destroyed what remained of hope in Marie's heart. 2 letters arrived almost simultaneously. The first was from a lawyer in Dublin, informing that the ship on which Pierre was traveling back to France had encountered a terrible storm off the coast of Brittany. The ship had sunk, and there were no survivors. The second letter was even crueler. It came signed by 2 of Pierre's cousins, Jean and André, who lived in Paris and had displayed barely disguised coldness since Pierre's marriage to Marie. They confirmed Pierre's death and informed that they would assume the family business. There was a subtle cruelty in how the letter was written, as if they were more interested in establishing their claim to the inheritance than expressing condolences. Marie had no way of knowing those letters were carefully constructed lies. Pierre was alive. The ship had indeed encountered a storm but hadn't sunk. It had been forced to dock at a remote port on the Scottish coast for repairs that took weeks. Communications were difficult, and Pierre, desperate to return to Paris, hadn't been able to send regular news. But Jean and André, the envious cousins, saw in Pierre's delay an opportunity. The two cousins had always coveted Pierre's position in the family company. He was more competent, more loved by his father, more respected by business partners. And when they learned of the smallpox epidemic in Paris, when they heard rumors that Pierre's young wife had contracted the disease, they saw a chance to destroy the marriage and seize control. They forged false letters announcing Pierre's death in the shipwreck. They hoped that Marie, devastated by loss and disfigured by disease, would quietly disappear from the family's life. And when Pierre finally returned, they would tell him Marie had died during the epidemic. Two problems solved with one cruel lie. Marie believed. Why wouldn't she? The letters seemed authentic, came from apparently reliable sources. She had no reason to suspect Jean and André, who visited the family personally to express their condolences with somber faces and soft words. Pierre was dead. Her beloved, her husband, the one who promised to return before winter, lay at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. The pain Marie felt was beyond what words can describe. It was as if something essential within her had been torn out, leaving only a dark and cold void. But she didn't have the luxury of surrendering completely to grief. Her mother was even sicker, and now, without Pierre and without the financial support he provided, the family's situation had become precarious. Marie's father worked long hours in his workshop, but age was beginning to take its toll, and his tired eyes could no longer perform the delicate work that once guaranteed him good income. Marie made a decision. She would begin working as a seamstress, a skill she had learned from her mother. But working meant leaving home, interacting with people, and that meant exposing her disfigured face to the world. She began wearing veils, covering the scars as much as possible. But even so, she saw the looks of pity, of horror, of morbid curiosity. Each look was a stab, a reminder of what she had lost. The months turned into years. Marie's mother died in the winter of 1667, and with her death, something more died inside Marie. She continued living, but it was a mechanical existence, devoid of joy. She worked, cared for her father, went to church on Sundays, but everything was done with an apathy that frightened those who knew her. The old clockmaker tried to cheer her up, tried to convince her that life still had good things to offer, but Marie couldn't see beyond the gray curtain that had descended over her world. Pierre, meanwhile, had finally returned to Paris in December 1666, months after his departure. He arrived full of hope, eager to embrace Marie and tell her about the trials he had faced. But what he found was devastating. Jean and André received him with somber faces and terrible news. Marie had died during the smallpox epidemic. They showed him falsified records, presented bribed witnesses who confirmed the story. Pierre was shattered. For months, he lived in a state of shock. He visited the cemetery where, according to Jean and André, Marie had been buried. He spent hours before a tombstone that marked no one's grave, just another of the cousins' cruel fabrications. Pierre plunged into work, trying to drown his pain in frantic activities. He expanded the family business, traveled constantly, avoided everything that might remind him of Marie. But Jean and André underestimated the persistence of true love and the fragility of lies. In 1670, 4 years after the supposed deaths of Marie and Pierre, the truth began to emerge unexpectedly. An old Irish sailor who had served on Pierre's ship during the voyage to Ireland arrived in Paris. He had heard rumors about the shipwreck that supposedly killed several crew members and was confused because he himself had been on that ship and knew there had been no shipwreck, only a storm that forced them to dock. Intrigued, he began asking questions. The sailor's questions reached the ears of an honest lawyer who had worked with Pierre's father. The lawyer began his own investigation and discovered inconsistencies in the letters and documents presented by Jean and André. He confronted the two cousins, who, faced with mounting evidence and the possibility of serious legal proceedings, confessed. They confessed they had lied about the shipwreck. They confessed they had told Pierre that Marie was dead when she, in fact, still lived. Pierre was stunned. Marie was alive. For 4 years, he had mourned her, had visited an empty grave, had tortured himself with guilt for leaving her alone. And all that time, she was alive. Immediately, he began searching for her. He discovered she still lived in her father's house in Saint-Germain. His heart exploded with joy and anxiety. He prepared to go to her, to embrace her, to ask forgiveness for believing the lies, to rebuild the life that had been stolen from them. But before Pierre could reach Marie, news that he was alive reached her. A neighbor, who had heard the rumors beginning to circulate through the city, knocked on the door and told her everything. Pierre was alive. The shipwreck had been a lie. He had returned to Paris years ago, but had been deceived into believing she was dead. And now, knowing the truth, he was on his way. Marie was paralyzed. Joy and terror fought within her. Pierre was alive. The joy of this discovery was so intense she could barely breathe. But then she looked at her reflection in the glass window, saw the scars marking her face, and terror took hold. Pierre had last seen her as a beautiful young woman. Now he would find a woman marked by disease, disfigured, aged beyond her years by pain and suffering. She couldn't bear the idea of seeing disappointment, horror, or pity in his eyes. So Marie made a decision that would define the final act of her personal tragedy. She wouldn't be home when Pierre arrived. She would leave, disappear, allow him to move forward without the burden of a love tied to a ruined face. She wrote a letter to her father, explaining her decision. She said she loved Pierre too much to subject him to the sight of what she had become. She said he deserved to be happy, deserved to find someone who could give him the beautiful children they had always dreamed of having, someone who could walk beside him without shame or embarrassment. The old clockmaker begged his daughter to stay, to wait for Pierre, to give him the chance to prove his love was deeper than physical appearance. But Marie was determined. That night, she departed. She took only some clothes, a few coins, and the locket Pierre had given her before leaving for Ireland years ago. Marie found refuge in a convent on the outskirts of Paris, a place that welcomed women who had nowhere else to go. She didn't become a nun, but worked for the sisters, helping care for the sick and poor. It was work that brought her a certain comfort, a sense of purpose. If she couldn't have the life she dreamed of with Pierre, at least she could dedicate her existence to alleviating others' suffering. Pierre was devastated when he arrived at the house and discovered Marie had left. He read the letter she had left for her father, and each word was a blade cutting his heart. She had fled because she believed he wouldn't love her anymore because of the scars. Didn't she understand that for him, Marie was much more than a beautiful face? Didn't she understand that the love he felt for her was built on foundations deeper than physical beauty? Pierre began searching for her. He visited churches, convents, orphanages, hospitals. He described Marie to nuns, priests, beggars, anyone who might have information. But Paris was large, and Marie, in her desire to disappear, had been careful not to leave obvious traces. Months passed without success. It was on a spring day in 1671, 5 years after the fateful separation, that destiny finally conspired to reunite them. Pierre was visiting a hospital run by nuns, distributing alms and asking, as he always did, if anyone knew a woman named Marie. One of the older nuns, who occasionally visited the convent where Marie worked, recognized the description. She knew Marie, or at least knew a woman with smallpox scars who worked under the name Sister Marie at the convent of St. Clair. Pierre left immediately. The convent was several hours' ride from Paris in a tranquil valley surrounded by green hills. When he arrived, the sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky in orange and pink tones. He knocked on the door, was received by the Mother Superior, and explained whom he sought. The Mother Superior knew Marie's story, at least in part. She knew Marie was hiding a painful past, but she saw in Pierre a sincerity that moved her. She agreed to call Marie. Marie was in the convent garden, tending medicinal herbs, when a novice came to call her. There was a man at the door asking to see her. Marie's heart began to beat irregularly. She knew, without needing to be told, who that man was. Part of her wanted to run to him. Another part wanted to flee, hide even more deeply where he could never find her. But Marie had matured during those years of solitude and service. She had learned that running from pain didn't eliminate it, only postponed it. With slow steps, her heart pounding in her chest, she walked to the convent entrance. And there, for the first time in 5 years, she saw Pierre. He had changed. He was thinner. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't existed before, some gray strands in his brown hair. But his eyes, those eyes she had loved from the first moment, remained the same. And when he saw her, when his gaze rested on her scarred face, there was no horror. There was no revulsion. There were only tears. Pierre crossed the distance between them in quick steps. And before Marie could say anything, before she could raise more barriers, he enveloped her in his arms. "Marie," he whispered, his voice broken with emotion. "My Marie, why did you run? Why did you think I would stop loving you?" She tried to explain, tried to tell him about the scars, about her ruined face, about how she didn't want to be a burden to him. But Pierre gently placed a finger on her lips. "Do you think I loved you only for your face? Do you think what I felt for you was that superficial? Marie, I love you for who you are. I love your kindness, your courage, your capacity for sacrifice. These scars," he gently touched her face, tracing the marks left by smallpox. "These scars are witnesses to your compassion. You earned them saving a child, caring for your mother, living with integrity even when the world was collapsing around you. How could I love you less for that?" Marie collapsed. All the years of pain, of loneliness, of self-denial, came forth in tears that seemed endless. And Pierre held her, letting her release all that accumulated pain. The Mother Superior and the other nuns, watching from afar, wept too, silent witnesses to a love that had survived lies, disease, separation, and despair. In the days that followed, Pierre and Marie talked for long hours. He told her about Jean and Andreas' betrayal, about how the cousins had been punished for their lies, about how he had searched for her tirelessly. Marie, in turn, told him about her illness, about the pain of believing he was dead, about her decision to hide, to spare him. Gradually, the wounds began to heal, not those on her face, which would remain forever, but those of the soul. Pierre asked Marie to return with him to Paris, to marry again in a ceremony that would mark a new beginning. But Marie hesitated. "Pierre," she said, "I'm no longer the young woman you left behind. Not just my face has changed. I've changed. These years transformed me. And the work I do here, caring for the sick, helping the poor, it brings me a peace I'm not sure I could find back in the life we had." Pierre understood, and instead of insisting, he made a counter-proposal. "Then let me stay here with you. Let me help in the work you do. I don't need the riches of Paris, don't need the family business. I need only you and a life lived with purpose. If this is where you find peace, then this is where we'll build our life together." And so, Pierre and Marie rebuilt their life, not in the glamorous Paris of Louis XIV, but in the tranquil valley where the convent of Saint Claire offered refuge to those in need. Pierre used his business experience to help the convent better manage its finances. Marie continued her work caring for the sick, and together, they finally had the children they had always wanted, children who grew up understanding that a person's true worth lies not in their appearance, but in the depth of their character. The years brought gray hair and slower bodies, but also brought a serene happiness born from overcoming unimaginable trials. When Marie looked at Pierre, she saw not just the man who had loved her when she was beautiful, but the man who had continued to love her when she believed she was no longer worthy of love. And when Pierre looked at Marie, he saw not the scars marking her face, but the extraordinary woman whose capacity to love and sacrifice transcended any superficial standard of beauty. In her later years, Marie frequently received visits from young women who had contracted smallpox and now carried the same scars she did. They came seeking comfort, seeking hope that their lives weren't over, and Marie told them, with the authority of one who had lived the experience, "The scars on your face are visible, but it's the scars of the soul that truly define us. You can choose to let these marks destroy you, or you can choose to see them as testimonies of your survival, of your courage, of your humanity. True love sees beyond the surface. And if someone can't love you with these marks, then it wasn't true love to begin with." The story of Marie and Pierre became a legend whispered in the convent corridors, told to novices as an example of love that transcends worldly trials. It was a story about sacrifice, about how true love isn't the kind that exists in the absence of difficulties, but the kind that persists despite them. It was a story about renunciation and redemption, about how sometimes we must lose everything to discover what truly matters. And when Marie finally closed her eyes for the last time, at 73 years old, surrounded by Pierre, her children and grandchildren, there was a serene smile on her face. The scars were still there, permanent marks of the price she had paid for compassion. But for those who loved her, those scars were beautiful, because they told the story of a woman who chose to love, sacrifice, forgive, and continue living even when the world gave her every reason to give up. Marie's life teaches us that true love isn't blind, but sees everything, including imperfections, and chooses to love anyway. It teaches us that true beauty doesn't lie in the perfection of skin, but in the depth of the soul. It teaches us that life's trials, however cruel they may be, don't have the power to destroy us unless we give them that power. And above all, it teaches us that redemption doesn't come from the absence of scars, but from accepting them as an integral part of who we are. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more transformative narratives. Until our next journey together.